I'm here with several of my colleagues as well. Hopefully you've had a chance to meet a few of us. Matt and Sean in the back there, representing some of the business development group. Heather Goff up front here, preeminent deliverability strategist in the industry. We're all super excited to be back here, and I certainly hope that we are back again. So I am going to talk about Generation Z and email. Gen Z, if you don't know, is the largest generation globally. So bigger than the millennial population in that generation. And they age from, their age range is between 6 and 21 right now. So not all of them are eligible for email from us at this point. But many of them are, and they will be moving into that age quickly. Between myself and my team over the past month, we have had no fewer than 5 major marketers ask the question, not, how do I make email content more relevant for Gen Z, but rather, is email relevant for Gen Z? Which is a pretty big nuanced question there, right? When you're talking about, is email even relevant here? So what I've done, I've compiled some primary research from a bunch of different sources. So a shout out to SendGrid, Bluecore, CMO.com, Google, Forbes. Thank you all for supplying some of the information that I'm using here today. I'm serving as the connective tissue, hopefully, pulling some of the best of those insights and then transforming it into, so what? What does that mean for me as an email marketer? What do I need to know and think about as it relates to how I'm either communicating today to this large population or will be before too long, okay? So that's our topic here today. I do want to just spend a moment, if you're not familiar with Responsis, I'm just going to take a moment here. Responsis is a part of the Oracle Marketing Cloud stack. It is typically used by B2C marketers who are interested in personalized cross-channel communication at scale. We've been doing this for years and years for some of the world's largest marketers who are pushing out push, SMS, email, display, some off-channel in a very coordinated, orchestrated capacity. And really, our goal is your goal as marketers. We're focused on an optimized customer experience. We want to acquire better customers. We want to retain those customers. We want to increase their loyalty, do it in an easy-to-use platform using adaptive intelligence, multivariate testing to generate the best business outcomes possible for us. And that can be accomplished through Responsis. So I'm going to tell you a little story here this morning. And it starts with my son. He's 12. So he is in the midst of the Gen Z cohort as a generation. This is him sitting on the couch. He's looking at an iPhone. Now, if you know anything about 12-year-old boys, you'd have a pretty good guess, maybe, of what he's doing on his iPhone. And one of those guesses might be he's watching YouTube videos. Because if you're not familiar with Gen Z and YouTube, they, like 70 to 75% watch 2 hours of YouTube videos a day. 2 hours a day, okay? That would be a great guess, but not the right answer here. Okay. You might guess he's at the end of like a 12-hour Fortnite bender, right? If you're not familiar with Fortnite, you will be at some point. And there's probably some weird Venn diagram between watching Fortnite videos on YouTube that would just break the internet when it comes to numbers here. But Fortnite is not the right answer either. So the right answer is he was creating a live stream cat cam, because we adopted kittens this summer, and we were going away for the first time over Thanksgiving. And he wanted to live stream the hijinks that might be happening back home when we were away. And do not worry, I'm not showing you highlights from the cat cam here today. But, wow, disappointing the audience already. Wow, ooh, this is not going well. The point of this is the first really, truly digitally native audience that we have, right? They're born in the late 90s, so they've grown up only knowing internet, connectivity, right? They know HD, they know touchscreens, smartphones, right? Like, that is all they know. And that has big implications for us as marketers. They have certain expectations as it relates to interacting with devices, with communicating to one another and being communicated to, living in this type of advanced technological world from day one. So there are pretty big implications for us as marketers that we need to be dialed into as it relates to Gen Z and their experience. All right, so that's it for the cat. So those who are interested in that, this is your last chance. Quick peek. Here we go. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about some of the detail here. So as I mentioned, globally, the largest population, 26% of the global population is in Gen Z. Now, they're not the largest population in the US. That is still held by the millennials, but it's just by a small amount, so not far off there. They have big spending power or influence in spending power. We're talking billions with a B of dollars, right? So again, if your attention has not been reached yet, it should be. Spend a lot of time online. I mentioned the YouTube videos earlier. Almost half spend about 3 hours a day online. They're twice as likely to want to shop online as their millennial cohorts, right? So you start to just see even differences with millennials there. 67% use their smartphone as their primary email device. So you'll start to see a theme of just the mobile, and I'm not talking about iPads. It's the smartphone that's really key. 85% use email at least monthly. We'll get back to the monthly term here momentarily for receiving emails either personally or from marketers. So monthly, if you are a marketer who mails daily, doesn't really make you feel the warm and fuzzies, right? Checking in once a month on email. But you start to see some other numbers that indicate, I think, some positive tailwinds here. One of those is 83% of Gen Z believes that their use of email will either be the same or increase over the next 5 years. And that's higher than Gen X, that's higher than their millennial brethren there. 68% deem email essential for companies to send advertisements. And I think most interestingly, they view email as a more lasting, important, if you will, substantive type of communication compared to social, for example, which are seen as more fleeting, a little bit lighter types of communication. So as email marketers, there's a certain amount of gravitas, right, associated with our messaging in Generation Z's mind. Not to bury the headline, but ultimately it comes down to this, right? Like, how do they want to be messaged? How do they want to be messaged to? What do they want from a brand that they're engaging with? And 2/3 prefer email as that channel, right? So this is some of the positive indicators, I think, for us as email marketers. All of the other channels off to the side, predominantly social ones, much smaller fractions here. So email really key and important as it relates to their preferred way to engage with the brand. All right, what else do we know about them? I mentioned phones, most used devices, 3 or more hours a day on them. So super important for us to keep that in mind. That's followed by laptops and then televisions. Obviously a lot of screen time taking place regardless here. And they use these phones to make purchases. So we saw a little bit of that data earlier, but if you look at teens in particular, 53% say that they mostly use smartphones for purchases. Now, this is important because if they're clicking through on an email to a website, that experience on a mobile phone to convert, and that's not always optimized, I will say, even from recent personal experience, is really critical. And that's where we as email marketers have the baton handoff, and we're reliant upon that site experience to be seamless and to be able to be done via a smartphone. Some of the other cohorts here start to spill into the millennials, but smaller in general. So you start to see this generation that is very interested in conducting everything on their smartphone. Also interesting to us is their heavily most favored nation status with Gmail. 70% of this audience prefers Gmail. That is massive. And 73% of that 70% are dialed into the promotions tab, which is good. That's where most of our emails end up, although recently that's been a little quirk. Millennials, 61%, and then it drops off pretty dramatically with Gen X and baby boomers. 70% is pretty big. So if Gmail, or when Gmail and Google change that customer experience as it relates to this generation, that's big. And this should continue to be, the Gmail domain, a large and growing percentage part of almost everyone's file here. So interesting to keep tabs on Gmail, obviously, if you weren't already. All right, so we've learned a lot about stats and trends and so forth. What does this mean for us as email marketers? How do we go about looking at this? So I've got a few tactics here that I think are useful for us to keep in mind as it relates to communicating with them. And the first one here is talking about looking at developing a story and looking at even serialized types of messaging and communications ultimately. This is a generation that's not necessarily into tradition, and I think the story dimension of pushing this across channels is a compelling way to engage with them. Clearly a generation that is used to multitasking from day one. The importance of catching that attention visually is really, I think it's a really critical one too. Bright colors, I think this plays well into a live clicker, a movable ink type of technologies, right, that have a built-in dimension of high engagement there. Think about the experience. This is similar with the millennial generation, very focused on the experience side of the house. And this little bullet here is probably worth an entire session itself. Think about what email may be like using AR goggles, right? If I'm actually looking at my phone and there's an AR dimension to an email that's built on AR, right? I could really change how we're designing and thinking about email. Obviously, dimensions of interactivity. Think about voice assistants, and if Alexa or Siri is reading the email and it's largely visually designed, how does that render? How do we track those types of metrics, right? Real interesting implications, I think, here, but that overall experience, leveraging video, right, really important here. No surprise, be quick. This is, I think, a universal recommendation in general, get to the point, and certainly holds true with Gen Z. Be a part of their narrative. They can smell fake from a mile away, so authenticity is really important, and leveraging influencers that are important to them, focusing on user-generated content that may come from them or their peers, I think is a great way to engage this audience. Mobile first, right? You had me at hello with this, but even more so, even more critical and more true for Gen Z. And then finally, let's leverage some of this direct feedback. Let's look at the videos that they are watching. Let's look at the content that they're clicking on and feed that back into subsequent types of messaging for them ultimately, so that that next message, that next touch is that much more engaging. Okay, so these are some of the tactics I think that are most relevant. Let's look at some examples from some brands. And I'm going to pull up 3 different brands here. I'm not necessarily saying that these brands are targeting Gen Z so much as they are representations, I think, of some of these tactics that would appeal to that audience, right? So I'm going to start actually with Warby Parker. So Warby Parker, you can get a sense with this email. There is a animation dimension that's not reflected here, but the confetti that falls, very mobile friendly, actually has a cross-channel connection and serialized dimension to it from email to social here. Very nice, clean, sort of playful content here. Similar with these, I think strikingly designed, stand out in the inbox as a function of that. Also will have a dimension of influencers, bloggers, user-generated content, ultimately that are good examples here. Nintendo Switch, a little bit better overlap, I think, with the Gen Z audience. Clearly a strong visual dimension. If you weren't awake already this morning and this popped in your inbox, you would be. There are a couple of example types of emails here. There's a post-game purchase on the left, the new product launch on the right. see one of them has some video dimension associated with it, right? No surprise there about about what the new game is. There's a dimension within the post-game purchase that talks about trying to engage with the platform across their friends. So I think some good examples here. Then finally, this is one from Charlotte Roos. Very mobile-friendly design, clearly plugs into the social dimension and does so in an interesting order that I'm sure is not random, with Instagram being the lead. That is the preferred social platform for Gen Z. So it starts with that, and then as you scroll down, the email moves into Facebook and Pinterest here. Very mobile-friendly, also pushing user-generated content as a dimension here. So again, just some examples, I think, of how some of those tactics can be represented in actual emails. Okay. So I'm going to wrap up here today with just a quick recap. Gen Z can't be ignored, right? Largest population globally, 26% overall, important for all of us. Email's still a thing. We will be back for number 14 next year, right? I don't think this is a generation that's going to put us out of business. Cat cams, don't recommend it, not a thing. If you're celebrating holidays coming up, don't bother with that. Gen Z does make it a little bit easier with their overwhelming use of Gmail, right? And particularly as they become a larger part of your file. That reduces I think some of the dimensions associated with complexity of a diverse base. Focus on some of those tactics, right, associated with in ways to engage them. So we walked through those 6 or 7 different approaches. And then finally, I think for each of you, it's important to understand how this generation will age into your file. So if you're AARP, you've got a 20 or 30 year wait yet ahead of you, right? Not as applicable. But for, I think, the vast majority of marketers in the room, it's a pretty material shift coming into your file that's important to be dialed into, cognizant of, and attentive to. So I appreciate your time today. It's been a great several days for us here, and happy holidays coming up.